part in my introduction, I talked about the last taboo, death being the last taboo. Why do you think it's considered the last taboo?
Well, when you look back on it historically, it was not that long ago that a father would go into a hospital to see the birth of his child and look at his child through glass for the first time. And now today, we have natural childbirth, and not only do you have it in a hospital, people are doing it at home, and they invite not only their family, but their friends, and they videotape it. So we're really comfortable with birth. Same thing with sex. You can sit in meetings today and have conversations. So definitely we need to start talking about death, and I think it's starting to happen right now.
Rhoda?
Yes, I feel like for me, because I've been through a lot of loss, that it's easy to talk about it, and so I try to be infectious with other people and get them to talk about it. When my son was killed, you know, when things calmed down a little bit, one of the first things I did was ask my father, you know, what do you want when you die? Because, you know, I made all these decisions for my son, never having the chance to discuss it with him. And, you know, since then, we've made those conversations with my whole family, because you know, you can have it your way, and I think there's a lot of positivity in that.
Oh, that's interesting when you talk about having it your way. We'll get back to that. But you mentioned when your son died, your
Yes.
son was murdered.
My son was murdered 17 years ago by his school roommate. He put some dishes in the wrong cabinet, and he was shot 4 times.
And
So-
that's what got you involved in your journey.
Right. I mean, before I lost my son Christopher, I had lost all 4 grandparents, my 2 brothers, my mother. So I was not a stranger to grief, but this is losing a child is very different.
Now, you talked about birth, you talked about sex, but there's no joy, I would think, in death, which puts it on another whole level, which might explain the taboo.
Well,
It's something that's painful for people
Yeah.
in a way that some of the other things you discussed are not.
Well, I just had a friend recently die. 6 years she battled ovarian cancer. And for 4 years we had a healing circle. There was about 20 of us. And we would get together once a month and we would support her and her husband however she needed. You know, whether it was just a company, whether it was just so she could talk about her journey. But when it got into life, you know, we had shifts where 2 people of us that would be there with the husband to support, you know, hospice and everything that was going on with her. And it's beautiful. I mean, it was what she wanted, and she did it her way. And the husband wasn't too crazy about the idea in the beginning, but then he was so thankful that we were all there for him, because it was getting harder and harder and harder to take care of the person he loved so much.
Well, when you have those many people around you at such a sad time, it's certainly something that helps ease the sadness.
Yes.
Now, in terms of, how did you get involved in Seven Ponds?
through the death of my grandmother, and I think it was because of her sort of postmodern attitude, which I see is happening today, of I've had a good life, I'm ready to go, I don't want to have surgery, I don't want to die in a hospital, which is a big movement that's happening now. And she was actually giddy. She actually invited everybody to come visit her, and she just was really enjoying this final goodbye of like, this is a part of life, and I'm going to accept it, and I'm going to make the best of it. And so that's a lot of what's happening now, is this idea of celebrating a memory. And we're seeing changes right now, including there's a movement now for people to actually, I'm terminally ill, I'm accepting it, I'm going to die. I want to have a celebration with my friends there.
Yeah.
And
How
so
old was
I'm
your-
going to have a big party.
How old was your grandmother?
She was in her late 70s.
How do you explain her attitude?
She was a very postmodern thinker. That's how I explained it. I think she was very matter of fact, and I think we look at sex that way now and birth, and I think death is next. It's a part of life. It's a natural thing, and I think, you know, we want to start to have that conversation and not feel so like we're keeping everything inside of us and share. And I'm sure you have a good sense of what you went through,
Yeah.
this transition.
And what wonderful modeling she had for you. I mean, I just think that's such a gift. You know, if we can die as well as we lived, I think it's just beautiful.
So do you think, well, that assumes
Yeah.
that we're living well.
True.
And I'm thinking, you said if we could die as well as we live.
Yes.
And many people may be on the fence in terms of what they'd like to do, what their life is all about. And I'm wondering, in terms of the people that you meet, do many of them have that attitude?
Well, I'm kind of the person that talks about things people don't want to talk about, like death and murder and and things like that. So I think a lot of people have gotten more comfortable with the idea of being around me. And I'll ask matter-of-fact questions, and are you organized? Or if someone does get sick and have a challenge, I'll be the person that'll come in and say, do you have your things organized? Do you know what you want? Can we talk about this now? Because it's, probably going to happen. And if it doesn't, it's okay. You'll be ready.
And I can imagine somebody who would say, none of your business. Why are you asking me these questions?
I haven't had that reaction. I haven't had that reaction thus far.
That's because of your relationship with the people that
Yes,
you've been
yes.
involved with.
Yes, or I will suggest to somebody who knows them better than I do that they should have that conversation. Because people feel more comfortable when they're organized. Or I do. Maybe that's my own personal thing, but.
I would think some things it depends on where you are in terms of organization. And I would think some people might think they rather organize their day-to-day needs rather than organizing something that may be kind of far off. Maybe there is that behind that feeling of not wanting to deal with the subject unless it's absolutely imminent in your life.
Well, I think people are at a point where, like you're expressing this desire to have the conversation. There's the Conversation Project. Actually, it's a website as well that Ellen Goodman put together. And I think that it's all about having that conversation before you die and hopefully even before you're terminally ill. And I think there's a real movement towards people wanting to do that. And that's part of what we do, is provide that sort of direction and information, those resources to kind of get you whatever part of the process you're going through, whether it's the terminally ill dying process, the death, or the grieving part, to figure out how to.
And when you talk about people having that conversation, let's talk about the groups who might be having that conversation. These are people who are, let's say, older. Let's say the baby boomers.
Right.
Yes, I think,
For the
I think
most
the
part.
baby boomers are definitely entrenched. But I wanted to go back to a thought you said was some people aren't organized, and so maybe they wouldn't, have it together to die so well. I do a lot
To
of
die so well.
Well, I do a lot of volunteering in the Tenderloin of San Francisco, which is, a tough neighborhood. But the Zen Hospice Project has the hospice at Laguna Honda, and that's where they end up. The people that are close to death, and they have a beautiful death.
What's a beautiful death?
They can do what they want. They're comfortable. They're pain-free. They're in a clean place. Their family can come visit them. If they want to go back outside and smoke, that's the most important thing to them. They can. They can't smoke in their bedrooms, but they're comforted.
Well, when you say they're pain-free, is that they're on drugs? Depending on what they're dying from.
Right. Well, hospice is one of their really good attributes, is that they're very good at pain management. So.
And people are conscious.
Yes. Well, it takes a while to get the balance, but yes, people are conscious.
I would like to get back with you in Seven Ponds, but I just want to pursue this for a moment. In terms of people's attitudes, and I would think it might be a rare person. Now, what you're saying is it's not that rare. Someone whose death is imminent and they're in a good place. They're feeling good about it. That's a stage that people have to reach.
Yes, and you go through, maybe I'm pissed off that I'm here, but then you come to an acceptance, and it also has to do with pharmacologically how comfortable you are. Some people get very nauseous on one drug, so you have to get all that kind of stable. You kind of go into a period where you're not super conscious. It's kind of the roller coaster of the last ebb of your life. And the ride gets smaller in between, the ups and downs as you kind of go out. So
we'll get back. Seven Ponds. How did you happen to found Seven Ponds, and what is it all about?
It was, as I mentioned, it's been over 20 years since my grandmother passed away, and I really got me thinking about the fact that she was very symbolic of what was coming down the road, and I just had such an interest in it. I think more than anything, it was about meaning. It really does bring meaning as somebody who's interested in building a business, and so I started researching it and going to conferences, and I think the most important thing that I found was the cremation rate really reflected changing attitudes, and we're not at 50%, but we're approaching that right now in this country. And so over these last 2 decades, I've watched those changes happen. And there's a completely different attitude and way of dealing with end of life, and that to me is kind of the core place that sort of radiates out on those thoughts of how people want to deal with it. And they're scattering the ashes. As a rule of thumb, they're going into funeral homes, and they tend to want to do their own thing. So they, will get the ashes, and they'll plan something somewhere else, the memorial service. And they do, lovely events, whether it be on an ocean to scatter it, or at their home, or in, some kind of a meaningful place. Sometimes they divide them up, but most people are scattering as well. So it's very interesting, the changes that are happening. I don't know how that was for you.
Yeah, it was kind of a very surreal experience, separating my son's ashes, but I wanted him to be in different places, and so we did. And I do feel that the celebration is for the people that are here, and it's really important. One of the things I like about the Jewish tradition, 24 hours, get right to it, but I think it gets you started instead of kind of hovering in the sadness, it gets you in some kind of, what's the right word?
Frame of mind.
Yeah, or in a process of going to a memorial, and then you start on your own grief, your own little personal journey. But and I do agree with you about cremation and parties. It's turning into very unique things. It's not always this somber thing. It's like, let's have their favorite foods and their favorite music, and let's dance. So I think that's really positive.